What up, what up, what up? Welcome in to the Beards and Bible Podcast. My name is Josh. I'm joined on this snowy February morning by my good buddy Gabe Brothers. Gabe, how are we today?
We're good. We're awake. Yeah, we're here.
We're awake. You were just sharing with me just before we hit record. You got up at 3:45. Is that right? Couldn't sleep.
Yeah, I just heard the rain woke me up, and then when you're in that season of fatherhood and all of life's responsibilities, that come with that, and you wake up in the middle of the night, and your mind starts to turn and think, and it's just like I wish you could just switch your brain off. It was kind of one of those moments where you're like, man,
what's on your mind? Do you want to share it with our couple dozen listeners?
just variety of things. Yeah, being in a pastoral role, that there's stuff going on in people's lives, and you think about that, and you tend to your mind tends to wander and dwell on stuff. And I try to be spiritual and pray instead of just worry. And sometimes in that half conscious state, it makes it to that point. Sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, it's just you're waking up in the middle of the night, and your mind starts wondering how someone is doing, or what the day is going to look like, or start stressing about deadlines for this or that. And yeah, it's I'm sure people listening can relate. But
yeah. No, I've been there.
Yeah,
I've been there. Yeah. How's life besides a restless night?
Good. Yeah, just I've been doing this crazy thing in February, and it's the shortest month, right? But I've been doing this challenge for myself and other people kind of in our running group. I've been doing 3 miles every day, running 3 miles every day, 100 push-ups, 100 air squats, 10 pull-ups, and 100 verses of the Bible every single day in February. Yeah.
That's
and
awesome.
Today's day 19th of February, and yeah, it's tiring.
Yeah. Is the air squats the hardest part? Like, we going out and running after you do air squats the day before, you're still a little sore from the air squats?
No, actually, those started off being kind of my least favorite part, were the air squats, honestly. But we can break things up throughout the day and do them throughout the day. So I do those in sets of 10 or 25, depending on the day.
Right.
Honestly, the hardest part has just been carving out time to run 3 miles. And I'm not trying to run it super fast or do anything crazy.
Yeah.
Just taking 30 minutes out of the day to do it is tough, especially when you've got an 8-month-old baby and 3 other boys and a job and all this other stuff going on. So
yeah. Wow.
Yeah, probably not the best thing to start at this season of life, this little challenge thing, but not to mention trying to remodel our kitchen a little bit and redoing cabinets and that sort of stuff. So yeah.
And then also jumping on a podcast with your buddy at 5 a.m. That's also just one more thing. Yeah.
How about you? Anything last couple weeks you want to update everybody on?
Last couple of weeks have just been a challenging season of ministry and life for us. We've had quite a bit of deaths in our church family.
Oh, dang.
So I'm doing 2 funerals this weekend. I'm doing one on Friday, one on Saturday. And then we had some just stuff in our extended families. Jenny had an uncle that passed away from cancer. So we drove up to East Tennessee Friday, and yeah, man, it's just life is like that sometimes. The old timers used to say that tragedies happen in threes. I don't know why people say that, but it's like there's never just one person that passes. It's always in multiples, and I don't know what they're what that is, but gosh, that's been my experience since I've been a pastor. It's never that just one thing happens. It's like, multiple things happen all at the same time. So it's just heavy, man. It's just heavy to go through that. And walk with people who are mourning and hurting, but at the same time, you see God's goodness and God's grace in the midst of it, because you get to see like people come together and people love on each other, and what's really important during times like these. And so yeah, it's been tough, it's been heavy, but if I can make it through to Sunday afternoon this week and take a long nap on Sunday afternoon.
There you go. Yeah.
That's what.
Sad that, like you reach the point of fatherhood and life in general where you look forward to a just good, just deep nap, right? Just like that's what keeps you going. That's what motivates me. It's just man. You know what? I might take a nap today. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. But I think that's the essence. As pastors, I don't think I know we don't replace or call ourselves or even operate really in some kind of official priest kind of role. But, and I think in an unofficial role, I think we are in the essence like priests in the sense that people in ministerial leadership have to, or at least should, some people don't, but should suffer to a certain extent, to a degree, to bring people and connect people to God. And that's the essence of any biblical priest, any priest in the Bible. There was a degree of suffering to bring people and connect people to God. And it was when the people that should be sacrificing to connect people to God live in excess and exploit those people who they're supposed to be connecting to God, that bad things happen in biblical history. But so like the Levites, for instance, they lived off of, or they should have lived off of, the generosity and the gifts from the people of all the other 11 tribes. They didn't have an inheritance of land in Israel. There was a lot of different ways in which they kind of suffered in a way to bring people, but their role was to connect people to God. And so the priesthood is a funny thing. And I think speaking of priesthood,
I kind of knew where you were going with that.
Did you?
Yeah, it was this beautiful, long. You were landing the plane. You were going over this runway and that runway, and then just touchdown.
Yeah,
perfect, my friend. But I will say, and before we move on to talk about priesthood, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
When you sign up to go into full-time ministry and to give your life away to serve the people of God, it involves a level of, I'm willing to suffer with people. I'm willing to sacrifice for people. And I'm doing it out of love. And it's just part of it. And it's not really a burden. It's a blessing. It's a painful blessing at times, but it is a blessing, because you are there at hospitals, and you are there at gravesides and deathbeds, but you are there at weddings, and you're you're there at baptisms, right? So I mean, it's like yes to both. I mean, that's just the fullness of the human experience, is the joys and the beauties of it, and then the pains and the doldrums of it, and everything in between. And it's a wild ride, man. It's a good ride, but it's a wild ride. But at least you and I know who we are, and we know our genealogy, and we know something about each other. I'm trying to do a segue about Melchizedek, but I can't. My plane is crashing and burning. Okay, so today we're going to talk about this character, Melchizedek. But Gabe, give us the correct Hebrew pronunciation for this biblical character.
Oh, no pressure. Melchizedek would be, I guess, it's
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek. It's like two words smushed together. Melech is king. Tzedek is righteous.
Okay.
So you put them together, you have the righteous king.
Righteous king. Huh. Okay. So we're going to talk about who this person is, because I'm teaching through Hebrews, and I am in Hebrews 6 right now. And then we're heading into Hebrews 7 the next few weeks. And I've already had a ton of people come up to me. I had a gentleman after a service this weekend say, "Hey, who is Melchizedek? And here's what I think he is." And I said, whoa. We'll get to that. Hold your horses, simmer down. So I thought today we could just walk through every passage the Bible gives us in Melchizedek. And the good news is there's not that many passages about Melchizedek, which is one of the reasons he's so mysterious, and one of the reasons that we can hopefully do him justice in a podcast episode. But his first appearance shows up in Genesis 14. This is after Abram. So he is not Abraham yet. He is just Abram. So his name means exalted father. Is that right, Gabe?
Yeah.
Okay. So Abram returns from a battle where Abram basically pillages to rescue some family members, and he pillages these kings, and he returns from the battle, and he has all sorts of spoils from war. And Genesis 14 says, "And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, 'Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand.' And Abram gave him a tenth of everything." And then he exits stage left, and we never hear about Melchizedek in the book of Genesis again. It's pretty interesting. Gabe, is there any other context we need to know about Genesis 14 and Melchizedek before we move on? Is there anything we're missing in that maybe helps clarify who Melchizedek is, or is it just that mysterious? He just pops in and pops out.
Yeah, it seems like the people of that area knew of this person, or at least he had some kind of notoriety. But yeah, there seems to be a lot of context missing to who this person is. He just pops in, and the narrative of Abraham rescuing all this stuff and people in this big battle, and Abraham gives him this great honor and a tenth of everything, and it's like, wait, where'd he go? Who is this guy? Like, where did he come from?
He's like an IRS agent. He just pops up, says, "Give me your money," and then he leaves. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But that's kind of the essence of the mystery is like, okay, who was that? You know?
Yeah. So throughout both church history and also, and we'll get into kind of the Jewish understanding of Melchizedek, there's kind of three options as to who this person is. The first option is he's just a historical priest who is also a king of Salem, or what later became known as Jerusalem. So what's the significance of Jeru in that word, Salem?
Jerusalem is, I guess, from what I've gathered, is well, it started off just shalem, which is peace. Comes, it's the same root of shalom, and then there's this little additional part put on it eventually, Yerushalayim, which is like the city, or actually some people would say that the prefix that Yeru is like the cornerstone of, which I think is interesting. So it's like the cornerstone or dwelling. Some people would say dwelling of peace. Yeah, which is interesting. So Melchizedek is like the king of Shalem, or peace.
The king of peace, the prince of peace.
Yeah, the priest of peace.
The priest. Ooh, interesting. The plot thickens. Yeah. So that's the first option. That he's just, he literally is just a priest and a king of this area that later becomes the most significant piece of geography in the entire Bible. The second option is, and this is where we'll get into today to think about it, some people say that perhaps Melchizedek is a Christophany, that this is an appearance of the pre-incarnate Jesus. And there's reasons that people hold to that, and so we'll kind of unpack that. And the third option is he's just a mysterious priest. There's no biblical family records to him, and he pops in and pops out in the book of Genesis. But what makes it significant is he shows up in the Psalms, in a messianic psalm, and then he shows up in Hebrews, and Christ is compared to him. So pretty interesting, this figure. So here's what we know about him. He is a king of Salem, this place that becomes later known as Jerusalem, and he's a priest of God Most High. And I assume, Gabe, that the Hebrew word for God Most High is Elohim.
Yeah, I think it's using El Elyon.
El Elyon, okay.
Yeah.
Which is
God, like the highest God. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, the highest God or most high God. Yeah, El Elyon.
But this is before the Exodus, so the name Yahweh has not really been introduced yet.
Right. And that's, I mean, God tells Moses that, like, your forefathers didn't know me by my name, but I'm revealing my name to you, Moses. So yeah, the Tetragrammaton, Yud He Vav He is not used here in this narrative, although we're supposed to understand that El Elyon points to Yud He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton, the personal name of God.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Melchizedek brings out bread and wine, which some see as very symbolic, bread and wine, because obviously we have Passover and then we have communion later, right? He blesses Abraham. He acknowledges God as the one who granted him victory. And so Abraham, in response, gives Melchizedek a tenth of his spoils, or a tithe, showing reverence to Melchizedek. And so what makes this significant is this is before the priesthood, right? We don't really see priests in Genesis. This is before Aaron is chosen by God to be a priest, and this is before the tabernacle. This is before the sacrifices. This is before any of that, right? And so Melchizedek being a priest is kind of like, well, how did he learn how to be a priest? Who taught him how to be a priest? What does he do as a priest?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So Gabe, why is it you think he just sort of pops in? Why does he suddenly appear? And then why does he leave? Like, what's the significance of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, if we follow it's a Christophany, like this is actually Christ. Then it would be him trying to tell us that, hey, I'm making this covenant with Abraham and his descendants. That it's a covenant of provision and sustenance. That I'm going to protect the descendants of Abraham, and I'm going to give them a share in this land. Or it could just be. At face value, it could just be that there's just so happens to be this righteous king of Jerusalem, and he is like maybe a very prominent figure in that geographical location. So Abraham goes to him and knows that he is a priest of the Most High God and pays homage to him. And we're going to get into some of the other theories about, but yeah, in terms of like why he pops in and pops out, I honestly don't know. It's interesting. It's
he's like the Bigfoot of the Bible.
Yeah. I know there's some people that say this has to be Jesus. This has to be a Christophany. And I don't know that I'm there yet.
I'm not either.
Yeah. There's people that say in order for, the royal grant confirmed, like in Genesis 15 and then later in Genesis 22 between Abraham and God, that Genesis 14 and this interaction with Melchizedek is kind of a precursor to those other covenants that come and are established with Abraham and his descendants. I just don't fully understand that. And part of it is like I'm limited in my understanding of ancient Near Eastern and Middle Eastern covenant procedures. So, but I'm sure there is a lot here that that could be unpacked in view and like through the lens of those ancient covenant practices.
Right. And we got to remember this is before really the establishment of the nation of Israel. I mean, this is you're talking like the very, 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 very beginning. So ancient Semitic peoples that even outside of biblical scholarship, this is the most like, ancient people groups we're talking about. I mean, this is like old stuff, right? This is Genesis. The fact that he's
Hmm.
a priest and a king,
Yeah.
you don't see that throughout the history of the people of Israel.
Hmm.
The people of Israel did not have a king until 1 Samuel. God did
Right.
not really intend for them to have a king. He intended for them to be led by prophets and priests and, judges as well. You see that in the book of Judges.
Yeah.
And then they demanded a king, and so God gave them a king. But when the kings of Israel tried to operate as priests, that never worked well.
Yeah.
We see that in Saul. We see that in Hezekiah. So yeah, it's pretty rare that he's a priest and a king, and like that's seen as a good thing in this. What's the significance of that?
Well, that would ultimately point again, and kind of foreshadow the role of Christ as a priest and king. We see, like in Revelation 19, he's called the King of Kings. But also in Hebrews 7, he's called a priest.
Mm.
So I think it's interesting. Like he kind of foreshadows this ultimate king and ultimate priest, who not only is a successful leader and a governor of people, but also attaches people and draws people closer to the
Hmm.
Creator, which I think is a rare combination. You see like people in the Bible, like you mentioned, that are like really good at leading armies and conquering territory, like you'd say Solomon, but then ultimately lead people away from the pure worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah. Why does Abraham give him a tithe?
Yeah, that's
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 the
another good
oddest part of the
question.
story. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. Um, so I think Abraham recognizes that Melchizedek is a priest, and presumably worships and is attaching people, drawing people closer to the same God that Abraham has followed for much of his life up to this point.
Yeah.
And in doing so is through him honoring that God, honoring the God of the Bible.
Hmm. And that really becomes kind of that amount that is
Mm-hmm.
later instituted for the people through the law
Right. The
when
10th.
Moses receives the law, the 10th, right? So,
Yeah.
maybe Abraham is responding to, God's divine prompting, that God prompts him to give a 10th and he gives a 10th, and that kind of sets the precedent. And then later when God gives the law, it's kind of drawn from that precedent, perhaps,
Yeah. 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 And I tell people, in terms of like tithing to like a local church or whatever, like what is expected of us, like um, if you look at the law and what it demands in terms of tithes and offerings, it could be totaled up to about 23 to 25%
Right,
of
right, right,
your livelihood.
right. Because it's not just money or income.
Right.
Yeah,
But a tithe, the 10th, seems like pretty consistently throughout the Bible. That is the baseline. That is the starting point of God ordained generosity.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, that seems to be pretty substantial.
yeah. Well, Melchizedek, again, he shows up in Genesis and then he vanishes. And throughout the Pentateuch, we don't see him. We don't really see him in the prophets. But then he shows up one other time in the Old Testament, and that's in Psalm 110.
Hmm.
And the verse is, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek."
Hmm.
That's a fascinating verse because most people see this as a messianic prophecy,
Hmm.
that Psalm 110 is speaking of God's anointed one, the Messiah, the Mashiach, that's going
Hmm.
to be a priest and a king. And not only that, the fact that it says you are a priest forever, the fact that this priesthood that the Messiah is going to occupy is going to be eternal. It's not going to be like the Levitical priesthood, it's going to keep going and going and going and going. And then we read in Hebrews, that passage is quoted as a way of saying, well, Jesus fulfilled that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anything to say about that? I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's like the psalmist is writing this at a time when there is a Levitical priesthood in place. I mean, there's a whole order of priests that are sons of Aaron, and here is a psalmist writing down, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever of the order of Melchizedek. You wonder what the
or Melchizedek.
Melchizedek. But yeah, you wonder what the readers what their minds would have thought at that, thinking, okay, wait a second. There is this already operating order of priests in the temple right now. What does this mean? Is this like a higher order of priests? Yeah.
Well, and too, gosh, Aaron is a pretty well-known figure in the Jewish faith. The Levites, everybody knows the tribe of Levi.
Right.
But from the psalmist to go, well, wait a second. No, God's Messiah is going to be after the order not of the Levites, not of Aaron, but Melchizedek. This one obscure Old Testament figure that we don't know hardly anything about, right? So it kind of helps us understand, I think, the nature of, and I'd be interested to know what you would say about this, like the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, in the sense that Jesus, he occupies a priesthood older than the priesthood of the Old Covenant. Am I getting into weird territory here? Am I? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it seems like the order of Melchizedek, it seems to predate the order of the Levites.
Yeah.
So it's like there was the order of Melchizedek, then the Levites. Now the Levites, it's like they can't operate because there is no temple or altar around which to operate. Right. But there is the order of Melchizedek. And so I think the writer of Hebrews is saying to a messianic Jewish, Hebrews who believe in Jesus as their Messiah, but maybe are realizing that the temple is either about to be destroyed, has been destroyed, or they're not allowed to go to it. He's realizing that and writing to comfort them, saying, don't worry, because you have a high priest operating in a greater capacity that even predates that of the Levites. And a lot of the book of Hebrews is centered around the Yom Kippur offering, the day of atonement.
Yeah.
And I think the writer of Hebrews is realizing, okay, I need to encourage these people and help them understand that the priestly role that Jesus is fulfilling is one that predates that of the Levites.
Yeah, so Psalm 110:4, like Gabe said, it's quoted in Hebrews 5. And yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, like, that's the whole idea, is like Jesus is better than that. If you're tempted to go back to trusting in, sacrifices of blood and goats to, that didn't make sense. Sacrifices of bulls and goats, or the blood of bulls and goats. You know what I'm saying.
There's animals.
That's just animals, yeah. If you're tempted to go back to that, like, Jesus is better because Jesus is better than even the Levitical priesthood. Jesus is part of a higher and eternal priesthood. And so that's the whole point of the quotation from Hebrews 5, 6 and 10, that Jesus is not from the tribe of Levi. So in some ways, it would have been hard for a Hebrew to see Jesus as a priest because he's not from Levi, right?
Right. Right.
We've got his lineage in Matthew's gospel that shows us he's not from the tribe of Levi. But the writer of Hebrews says, but he is qualified to be a priest, even though he's not from the tribe of Levi, because he's a priest after the order of Melchizedek, which predates the Levitical priesthood. And so in some ways it is superior.
Yeah.
Because it's
And I
more
think
eternal.
it's something, is kind of hard to process and really digest is really like the last, talking about the Levitical priesthood and its status today, let's say, like what the last 8 chapters of the book of Ezekiel, which are all dealing with a future temple, a millennial temple, it seems to indicate that the Levites come back. Like in Ezekiel 44:10, but the Levites who went far from me when Israel went astray, who strayed away from me after their idols, they shall bear their guilt, yet they shall be ministers in my sanctuary as gatekeepers of the house and ministers of the house. They shall slay the burnt offerings and sacrifice for the people, and they shall stand before them to minister them. But there's like verse after verse after verse in the last 8 chapters of Ezekiel, which describe, I assume, a millennial or messianic era kind of temple.
A rebuilt third temple.
Right. And the Levites are all in it. The Levites are in charge of it. So it's interesting that there's like the line of Melchizedek, then the Levites pop up, the Levites go away, Melchizedek continues, then the Levites come back. And it's like interesting. It's so I want to be careful with my own verbiage and my own I'm not certain that the Levitical priesthood has been completely cut off, severed, abolished, or anything like that, because it seems to reemerge later.
Right. Yeah, and so we did an episode about the third temple last year sometime, or 2 years ago, whenever it was. And the idea that, from an eschatological standpoint, so that's study of end times. Yes, it is. Eschatological. Study the eschaton, end times. There is a persuasion that would say in order for end time events to unfold, according to biblical prophecy, that there would have to be a rebuilt third temple in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And if there is a rebuilt third temple in Jerusalem and there's the resuming of sacrifices in order to fulfill biblical prophecies, it would have to be the Levites in the temple resuming those sacrifices. So therefore the Levitical priesthood, it would have to return just like Ezekiel said it would return. Mm-hmm. So
it's a whole other
it's a whole other ball of wax. Yeah,
it is.
But if we understand that continues on during the millennial reign of Christ, here's another thing. Jesus would be both the king of Jerusalem and the great high priest of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. So he would be the high priest of the temple. Which is interesting to think about, which at that point, I'm not sure we would see animal sacrifices resumed when the world realized that Jesus' sacrifice fulfilled that. So maybe the Levites would offer other sacrifices besides the sacrifice of bulls and goats. We don't know, but interesting. Melchizedek shows up in Hebrews 5, basically quoting, the writer of Hebrews quotes Psalm 110:4, and then we see him in chapter 7 of Hebrews. So there's 2 passages where he's referred to. The first is 1 through 10. I'll just read a portion of it. It says, "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, and to him Abraham apportioned a tenth of everything. He is first, by translation of his name, king of righteousness. Then he is king of Salem, that is, king of peace." This is what you talked about with his name earlier.
Right. Yeah.
And here's what's interesting. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of Man, he continues forever. Very interesting. So the most interesting part of this is you can't go on like Ancestry.com and look him up, right?
Right.
He doesn't have any recorded genealogy. So some would say, well, that means this is a Christophany. But not necessarily, right? Because the priesthood was heretical or not
Heretical.
hereditary.
Hereditary. Yeah, I know what you meant.
You know what I meant, yeah. It wasn't
Yeah.
heretical. It was
Heretics.
hereditary. Yeah, it was hereditary. So if
Right.
I was a high priest, then the next high priest would be my son, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when someone was a high priest, you knew they were qualified to be a high priest because of their ancestry. Not so with Melchizedek, because he has no ancestry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he resembles the Son of God. It doesn't say that he is the Son of God. He says he resembles the Son of God, in that his priesthood is eternal, unlike the temporary Levitical priest. But that's an interesting phrase too. Like, what does that mean that he resembles the Son of God? Because this was a question I think somebody asked me after church. They said, does it mean, he said, well, it kind of seems that the text says that he looks like Jesus. I was like, I don't know if it says that. I'll have to go back and study it. But this probably was what that gentleman was referring to. He resembles the Son of God. Or what it actually says.
I wonder what what's the Greek
resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever.
It's Hebrews 7:10.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what the Greek verbiage there is, a Greek word is.
I mean, one could say that the way in which he resembles the Son of God is that he continues a priest forever. That's one way of reading that he's without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life.
Still, for in the loin of his father he was met with a... Hang on.
Are you looking up the Greek?
Yeah, I am, but what is that Greek? Or Hebrews 7.
I think that's 10, maybe. Let me look it up. I didn't put it in the show notes.
Yeah. Or verse 3. There it is. He is without father or mother or genealogy. Yeah, let me see what the Greek word there is. Sorry, I'm doing this on the fly here.
No, you're good.
Without father, without genealogy, neither beginning of days nor end of life, and having been made like, however, the Son.
That's interesting.
Having been made like. So yeah, the Greek there, aphomoiou, to make like, to resemble, to be made like. It's from the Greek prefix apo, away, and the root homoiou, which meaning to make like or to resemble.
Interesting. So it's basically saying, I mean, one could say that he's a type of Christ. He's a forerunner of Christ. He's made like unto the Son of God. That's what the KJV says.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean that he's the Son of God. It could mean that. But it's kind of saying the fact that the priesthood continues forever is indicative of the fact that this character represents more than just some rando that pops in and takes a tenth of it, Yeah,
it says in the New Testament, this word often conveys the idea of likeness or conformity to a particular pattern or example. Yeah.
Interesting. So what's the significance of him having no recorded genealogy?
Yeah, that is odd because, like you said, the line of priests is all about genealogy, and even to this day, you see there are priests to this day that can trace our genealogy back for centuries and have the last name, something like Cohen. That's typically going to be someone who is a priest. Cohen is Hebrew word for priest.
What about Levine? Is that also one?
Yeah. So you've got You've got Levites, and then there's an inner circle that are Kohanim or Cohens. The Levites had a role. Not all Levites are priests, but all priests are Levites.
Interesting.
So yeah, genealogy is everything. So it is an anomaly that this person has none that has been recorded, at least in the Bible.
Yeah.
So I think the writer of Hebrews is picking up on that and saying, which is interesting to me, that the writer of Hebrews in the first century, as he's writing this is saying, hey, Christ does Christ is eternal. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
some skeptics of the Bible would say that this idea of Jesus being divine, a divine Messiah, came much, much later,
Right. Right. Right.
but apparently not to the writer of Hebrews.
No. No. You see it from chapter 1 of Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Hebrews 7 tells us that Melchizedek is king of righteousness and king of peace.
Mm-hmm.
And that reflects really Jesus' character and mission, that he is our righteousness and that he gives us peace with God, which is a pretty significant thing when we think about how Jesus is, represented in the sense that if we are represented by Abraham, we're God's people, right? Abraham goes to this character who means king of peace and king of righteousness, and he responds to this character by saying, here, I'm going to honor you. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to put some level of trust in you to represent me before God. And perhaps that's kind of the thrust of that, not only to point to the character of Jesus, but also to, point to our response,
Yeah, I think it definitely points to Abraham giving him this tenth and honoring him with this tenth is like saying Abraham in a way is like having this gesture of gratitude and saying,
Yeah.
hey, I
Yeah.
just had this great victory and I'm going to give some of this back to you because I'm grateful to El Elyon for allowing me this great victory. And you're a
Mhm.
connector piece between he and I. And it definitely points to the idea that Jesus as the Messiah will one day receive the homage of the descendants of Abraham. And it's a
Interesting.
prophetic
Hmm.
picture of that, like, hey, I have been with you and have led you and guided you and preserved you all this time, even though you betrayed me and were in disbelief of who I am. Kind of like the story of Joseph, right? The
Right.
concealed identity, the concealed redeemer that is rejected.
Hmm.
And I think that definitely points to that one day the seed of Abraham, the physical seed of Abraham, descendants of Abraham, will turn around and say, you are, after all, the King of Peace, and we will pay you respect, and we will be grateful to you.
Yeah.
Which
We'll
is,
honor you as our priest.
yeah, look on
Yeah.
him whom we have pierced.
Pierced. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So then, kind of the last, and this is another verse 11 from Hebrews 7. Because the whole chapter of Hebrews 7 is kind of pointing to the priesthood of Jesus. But this is kind of the last appearance of Melchizedek in the Bible, Hebrews 7:11. Now, if
Mm.
perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron?
Mm.
So it kind of seems like this verse is saying Levitical priesthood, it was imperfect
Mm-hmm.
and it was temporary. And we talked about the prophecy of Ezekiel that, perhaps it comes back, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But Jesus' priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, it never goes away, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
superior than the Levitical priesthood. It's eternal. That Jesus was made priest by an oath from God. In other words, the one who appointed Jesus as the priest for the people of God was God, the
Mm.
God the Father, appointed God the Son, making him the perfect mediator. And so the implication is the priesthood of Jesus guarantees a better covenant than the covenant that was made to the people of Israel through the Levitical priesthood.
Yeah, and we see that in the Last Supper too. The bread and the wine,
Hmm.
which are symbols of what Abraham brought Melchizedek.
Interesting.
And he said, this is the cup of the new covenant.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Gosh,
and
there's
it's like,
so much that happens in that
mm-hmm,
part of the gospel narratives that we miss, right?
mm-hmm,
From the Passover to, like you said, Abraham and Melchizedek to, I've heard a lot of teaching on, a Jewish betrothal ceremony involving wine, involving bread as well.
Yeah.
Have you heard that?
Yeah. There's a lot. I mean, it's just we don't operate like that nowadays, and we're so far removed from the context of ancient covenant structures, and it's sadly much of it is lost on us because we lack understanding and clarity on that. So, but it seems like the Levitical priesthood, and at that time, when in the first century at least, the Levitical priesthood has kind of reached its zenith of corruption. You've got this like political corruption, and you've got this spiritual corruption, and it's all kind of just a big cesspool of like, the very people who are been ordained by God to connect people to God and draw them closer are turning it and using that privilege to exploit other people and to make personal gain. And so it's interesting that the high priest of the order of Melchizedek comes on the scene, cleanses the temple is one of the things he does too.
Yeah.
And he says, my house is supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations, and you made it like a den of robbers. It just seems like the Levitical priesthood just constantly, just morally was flawed and insufficient. It was ordained by God, so it was like it was there. It was a way for people to approach the presence of God, and then in addition to that, have their sins at least once a year through the Yom Kippur offering covered. But it seemed to be lacking in the sense that we as humans just have this cycle of going back to sin and corruption, chaos.
Yeah, and by the first century, like you said, I mean, the priesthood that had been traditionally a hereditary appointment, a lot of historians believe that Herod the Great stepped in and kind of said, no, I'll appoint who the priest is.
Right.
And I'm going to appoint the priest based not on, what the law says, but rather who I want to be in there. And in exchange, you can get rich off of the tithes and the offerings and keep peace with the Romans. And it was like this really messy kind of syndicate for, almost like the mafia, right? Like just this really corrupt, perverse, all sorts of exploitation and financial perversion happening. And so, to the first readers of the book of Hebrews, I mean, that would have been kind of an amazing, refreshing thing of like, hey, listen, like there is a better priesthood. There is a superior priesthood, and your high priest is Jesus. And this is not an institution that is subject to perversion, because the one who occupies this priesthood is Christ, right?
It's
the
perfect,
one, the Ancient of Days. So, I think there's so much that's needed, I think, to understand really kind of the point behind referencing Melchizedek. And I think a lot of that is kind of seeing the difference between the Levitical priesthood and then, what we see in Genesis. But, so I thought we might end kind of talking about the different views as to who Melchizedek is. So the Jewish view, well, first, who do you think, Gabe, who do you think he is? Is he a pre-incarnate Christ? Is he an angel? Is he just a real priest that God uses as a type? Who do you think? Let's see what your thoughts are, and then we'll look at the different views.
Honestly, if I had to land today on one particular view, it would be that he was a person, and who he was exactly isn't important that we understand and unpack, as much as we understand that he was used later by the writer of Hebrews as a picture and a symbol of how Christ operates on our behalf right now.
Yeah.
And that we shouldn't get so hung up on trying to identify who he was. Is he Shem? Is he Jesus? Is he just Joe Schmo that happened to be a priest? We're not supposed to get hung up on that as much as we're supposed to get hung up on how he is a foreshadow and a symbol of he who was to come. That is the Messiah.
Interesting.
That's where I would land today. And
Yeah.
in other words, to condense that down, I don't know, but his role is very significant and important.
Yeah. So you're saying the most important thing is his role, not who he is.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm there with you. So the traditional Jewish view is that Melchizedek is a historical figure. You mentioned Shem. Why Shem?
Yeah. Some people connect him to Shem. And they make a pretty compelling argument for that.
Which is a son of Noah, right?
Right. There's a pretty compelling argument for that. If you can trace the genealogy around and see, okay, yeah, maybe he is Shem. But
Shem
I've also seen
reinvents himself and calls himself Melchizedek.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, people make a decent argument for that, but then I've also seen people that kind of poke a hole in that as well. And so, yeah, I can't say that holds water completely, but it is a viable theory.
Okay, so the Jewish view, they don't see him as divine or messianic in any way, that he is a righteous king priest who later loses the priesthood to Abraham's line. So the Levites basically take the priesthood from Melchizedek, I guess. The Catholic view of Melchizedek is that he is a type of Christ, possibly foreshadowing the Eucharist. We talked about the bread and the wine, right? So not that it is Christ, but a character that represents Christ in some way. And so the main emphasis from the Catholic view is that it's the eternal priesthood of Christ that's being emphasized, and Melchizedek's offering is a foreshadowing of the Eucharist, of communion, of bread and of wine. God is saying, here's how you commune with me, here's how you connect with me, bread, wine. So I'm meeting you, Abraham, through this offering that I'm giving back to you of bread and wine. I'm giving you a part of myself, essentially, is how the Catholic view would see, which is an interesting thought. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Catholics are right in the sense that this is a gesture of gratitude, and then this gesture of gratitude is expanded upon later through the temple worship system. You know, that you bring the first of everything and you give it to the Levites. You know, that Eucharist, just it's a Greek word that just means thanksgiving. I don't agree with what the Catholics turn that into, but this is a gesture of thanksgiving. It is a gesture of Eucharist, in essence, but yeah.
Interesting. The Orthodox view of Melchizedek is, again, he's a type of Christ. Like the Catholics, he's, a figure that represents Christ. But the Orthodox view is that this is possibly an angelic figure or a mystical figure. So that may be where we get the idea of a Christophany. That's from the Orthodox view.
Interesting.
And so they hold that pretty open-handed. It's not like a hard and fast. It's not taught as a Christophany really by the Catholics, the Orthodox, or the Jewish view. It's kind of, it could be. We don't know. But there's a lot of mysterious and mystical aspects that are emphasized in the Orthodox tradition. And so I think of the major positions, this one would probably be the most open to Melchizedek being angelic or mystical, which is pretty interesting. And then the evangelical view is Melchizedek was a historical figure who just symbolizes Jesus' priesthood. And so I think that's probably where I tend to land in that last one, kind of like what you had said earlier, Gabe.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter exactly who he was. What matters is what he represented.
There's people listening right now that are like shouting at this podcast saying, yes, it does, because he's this person.
Yes.
And I don't have a problem with him being Christ and it being a Christophany. The only question I guess I got to flesh out is like, when did he arrive? When did he leave? Was he there just in that specific window just to receive that offering and kind of confirm that covenant with Abraham and then become like disappear again?
Yeah.
I just need to kind of work through that. I need someone to kind of guide me through that, I guess.
Yes.
Was he there for, apparently he was a king of Salem. So it wasn't just that he was there right there that day.
Right.
Seemed
People
to have
knew
this,
that he was that before.
right.
Yeah.
So I can't quite wrap my mind around Jesus coming to earth and being a king of a city, and then what happened to him after that.
Right.
So, but I'm open to it. I just need someone to kind of walk me through it. But yeah, there are people that would definitely say this has to be him because it legally confirms some covenants and stuff. But yeah, I'm just not there quite yet.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I'm not either. But there you go. There you have it. The mystery of I just think of who's Jamba the Genie from Pee Wee's Playhouse. Yes, old Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse.
Wow, that's quite the leap there to go.
I'm telling you, we moved from Melchizedek to Jamba the Genie from Pee Wee's Playhouse.
Man,
did you remember the guy from Southeastern? So story time from when Gabe and I were in college, real quick before we get off this podcast. There was a guy we went to school with that was flying home from like Christmas break or Thanksgiving break, and the guy sitting next to him on the plane was Paul Rubens, otherwise known as Pee Wee Herman. Do you remember this?
No.
Yeah, because Paul Rubens lived in the Tampa Bay area, and they were flying back into Tampa. And if you ever saw pictures of Paul Rubens out of character when he was not Pee Wee Herman, you would never have thought that was Pee Wee Herman. And so he was like talking to this guy, and he realized like, oh my gosh, you're Paul Rubens, you're Pee Wee Herman. He's like, yeah, And he's like, well, that's awesome, man. That's cool. And apparently Paul Rubens was like, yeah, man, hey, let me give you my number. And so they exchanged numbers. And he came back to the dorms, and he was like, oh my gosh, you'll never believe it. I sat next to Paul Rubens on an airplane, and we exchanged numbers. Well, then Paul Rubens started blowing this guy's phone up.
No.
Yeah. And it would be like 11 o'clock at night, like on a Tuesday, and Paul Rubens would call this guy and be like, hey, man, you want to go out and get a beer? And so this guy's like, dude, it's not every day you get a call from Pee Wee Herman to go get a beer, right? So he would like drive into Tampa at like, 11 o'clock at night, hang out with Paul Rubens for a couple hours. But then what started happening is he started realizing Paul Rubens was like weird, like just an odd guy that did not have that many friends. And he would just like go through these really lonely spells and then call this guy up at, this random times. And so he would go out and like hang out with him. And then he started getting to a point where he's just like, dude, I don't want to answer the phone anymore.
That's
That's
so interesting.
After
moral of the story.
More of the story. If you ever sit next to a celebrity on an airplane, they might be a lot lonelier and weirder than you think. So the novelty of being friends with Pee Wee Herman wore off really quickly. And he, after a couple of times of hanging out with him, said, I don't think I want to go hang out with Paul anymore. And so
that's bizarre. Yeah.
That is bizarre. Yeah. So,
I know that his Pee Wee Herman's father was actually a World War II fighter pilot, like
really
hero guy. Yeah, and he actually went and joined the Israeli Air Force in 1948 and fought during the Israeli War for Independence. Was actually shot down, but survived. He survived. Yeah. And he's actually like a legit like war hero.
So is he Jewish?
Yeah. And that's Pee Wee Herman's father.
I bet his dad was so proud of his son.
I know. It's like, hey, I was shot down out of I don't know, been shot at multiple times and served in World War II and killed Nazis and then what are you gonna do with your life? I'm gonna
la 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 connect the dots.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah.
And hey, if you're under the age of 30 and you have no idea who Pee Wee Herman is, you just need to do some research. Okay?
Yeah.
Go watch Pee Wee's Big Adventure. Start off with that, then watch Pee Wee's Playhouse. Yeah.
I don't agree with this. Don't do it. You have better things to spend your time on.
No, you don't. What's missing from this picture? Me without my bike!
Oh, man.
Oh, so many good quotes. I love Pee-wee's Big Adventure, one of my favorite movies. Tim Burton directed that one, by the way. So, in case you're wondering.
Wow.
Well, it has been a fun one.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, or you feel strongly that Melchizedek was something else we might have missed entirely, send us an email, beardsandbuffpodcast@gmail.com. Or if you watch Pee-wee's Big Adventure or Pee-wee's Playhouse and you feel very ripped off because we suggested it, send Gabe an email, gaberutledge@gmail.com. And yeah, thanks for listening, and we will see you guys next time.